Hey everybody, I'm Shane Claiborne, one of the founders of Red Letter Christians, and we are thrilled to collaborate with Fellowship of Reconciliation to do this emergency forum on conscientious objection. And there is a rich history of conscientious objectors, folks that object to war and military service because of their conscience. I actually have on my desk here some dog tags of military service members who have explained to me the weight and the burden of being asked to do things that are a violation of their conscience and their soul, and they've refused those orders, and many of them have suffered consequences and gone to jail. And in the Christian tradition, we have a rich history of conscientious objectors going back to the earliest days of Christianity. Folks that said, I've chosen to follow Jesus, and I cannot serve in the wars of Caesar. Folks who said, Jesus calls us to love our enemies. That means I cannot kill them. The early Christians said, for Christ, we can die, but we cannot kill. We can't hold the cross in one hand and a weapon in the other. And so they became a force for peace. And many of them were executed and jailed for standing against war. Some of the names are really famous now: Saint Francis of Assisi, Maximilian, but there's others that are a little lesser known. Objectors to Hitler and the Nazis in Germany, Franz Jagerstatter. There's folks that even right now are saying, I refuse to kill. And that's why we wanted to host this forum, because of the courageous voices in Israel that are saying we cannot comply with this genocide, with this killing. Some of those names are Tal Mitnick, 18 years old. He said, slaughter cannot solve slaughter. I do not want to take part in the continuation of the oppression and the continuation of the cycle of bloodshed, but I want to work directly for a solution. These young people have gone to jail. Sophia Orr, I reject participating in the violent policies of oppression and apartheid that Israel has imposed on the Palestinian people. Ben Arad, he said, I'm 18 years old and I refuse to enlist in the IDF. I oppose senseless killing, the policy of intentional starvation and sickness, and the sacrifice of soldiers, civilians, and hostages. And he says, the push for change must come from us. And so this is a powerful conversation with my friend Diana Oestreich, who is one of the great conscientious objectors, military service members and medics turned peacemaker, and she is a force to be reckoned with. We're going to hear from other courage is contagious. And that's our hope, is that we will see other people's courage, just like we think of Rosa Parks, or we think of the folks that have stood in front of tanks in the wars past and said, no, we cannot comply. And it was Gandhi that said it's our duty to obey the good laws, but it's our duty to disobey the bad laws, to not comply with injustice. We've got to refuse to go along with things that violate our conscience. And there's so many of those voices all over the place. I remember one of the drone operators was explaining what remote controlled war does to people. They even have language. They called it a splat. When someone is killed on the screen, ways that we try to sanitize or detach ourselves from the uh, the bloodshed that's happening. And he said it does something unique when you're doing it on a screen with a drone by remote control. There's a very unique type of moral injury when you um, do that kind of warfare and then go grab coffee afterwards or have dinner with your family. So we've got to turn from war, and it's folks like the ones you're going to hear today that can inspire us to ask the question, what does courage look like for me right now? So let me close with the words of one of those military service members that became a conscientious objector. George Mitzo wrote this poem. You, my church, told me it was wrong to kill, except in war. You, my teachers, told me it was wrong to kill except in war. You, my mother, my father, told me it was wrong to kill except in war. You, My friends told me it was wrong to kill except in war. You, my government, told me it was wrong to kill except in war. But now I know you were wrong. And now I will tell you, my church, my teachers, my father and mother, my friends, my government, it is not wrong to kill except in war. It is wrong to kill. So thank you for tuning in to this special emergency forum on conscientious objection.
I'm Ariel Gold of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. For anybody who isn't familiar with the Fellowship of Reconciliation, we are the oldest interfaith peace and justice organization in the world. And we formed in 1914 in Europe and 1915 in the United States to support, at that time, conscientious objectors in World War I. And we've gone on to support conscientious objection since then, and have also gotten heavily involved in civil rights and other racial justice and other anti-war work. And I am our first non-Christian and our first Jewish executive director. And I feel in many ways that it was beshert, meant to be, that I would end up leading our historical organization in this very dark time of genocide in the Middle East, in Israel and Palestine. And our co-host today is Diana Ostrich, who is, among other things, a dear friend of mine. Diana was a U.S. Army medic during the Iraq War who came to a realization of faith, a crisis moment, how we like to term those moments, when she realized she was called by God not to kill and to put down her arms and to become a conscientious objector. Diana is with a number of organizations. First off, Red Letter Christians, which I will let her introduce, say a little bit about, and the Waging Peace podcast. She's also an author of her story, and also Fellowship of Reconciliation's 2024 through 2026 Walter Wink Fellow. Diana, let me pass it to you to introduce the organizations you're with for a moment. And I think you're muted.
Welcome, everyone. All the suspense because only the host can unmute. So thank you for that pregnant pause there. I am Diana Ostrich, and I am so honored to be here with you today. I have the delight of teaming up with Red Letter Christians, and Red Letter Christians just believes that the person of Jesus really meant what he said. So when he said to care for the poor, to object to violence, and to really make the poor feel blessed, and the peacemakers be called the children of God. So we're doing some incredible work, and one of those is just collaborating and connecting with more and more folks that we can do more together than apart. So honored to be collaborating with Fellowship of Reconciliation and sharing some incredible time today with our conscientious objector, Yuval, who is calling in from Jerusalem right now. So Ariel, I'll let you do his introduction.
Yeah. Well, something I like to do when we have guests, I don't like to give too long of an introduction because I really like that introduction to be in the conversation, getting to know somebody. But I'll just give a little bit of background on why we are having this conversation right now. Since October 7th, there have been, I believe, only 3, but we'll talk to Yuval about that, young people who have chosen to go to jail in Israel when they were called to be conscripted into the military. And, that immediately touched my heart. First of all, I have children who are 21 and 22, and I just 21, 23. I can't imagine them having that maturity at that age. You know, what a brave and pronounced decision. And so we've been wanting to lift that up, not in ways of how does that help to transform society and build the world that we all want to live in together? And how does that express solidarity across religions and races and so much? And so we wanted to speak with a conscientious objector from Israel, and we were introduced to Yuval, who grew up in Israel in a more traditional Jewish Israeli nationalist experience, but had a crisis of conscience, as we call it in America, where he just said, I cannot serve my country in this way. I cannot participate in this violence, and chose to go to jail. And so with that, I want to introduce Yuval, and then, you know, get into who you are as we begin this conversation. I believe you're muted. We might need somebody to unmute you if that's, I think you can unmute yourself.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
My name is Yuval. I'm 21 years old. I'm originally from a small community in the south of Israel, and I have refused to go to enlist in the military about a year ago. This time last year, I was still in jail, and I have been sentenced overall to 70 days. Yeah.
If you could start, I'm immediately curious. You said Southern Israel. Is that the Gaza envelope where October 7th took place, or?
It's not the Gaza envelope, but it's not far. During the initial bombings of the northern part of the Gaza Strip, the windows of my house were shaking, actually. But I'm very close to the wall, the separation wall, in the Israeli side of it.
If you could start by telling us a little bit of your upbringing, what school was like, what the culture in Israel and in your area where you lived was like, and a bit about your family.
I come from a traditional, rather well-off Ashkenazi. Some of you know kibbutz, then it's not too far. Politically, I grew up in the center left of the Zionist spectrum. And this place is also a very militarist one, but also not in a very fascist kind of way, but in a very it's very subtle. It's very, you know, everybody's proud of it, and you do it because you have to do it, and you try to go to the best place you can go to. And that was always like what I was supposed to do. And from the age of 0, I knew I'm going to enlist. During Israeli Independence Day, for example, we would the army opens all its bases, and you can go and visit and see all the sniper rifles and the camo gear and the very cool drones and the weapons they confiscate from Palestinian militants. And yeah, we used to go to such places, and military museums. And yeah, my father was a tank commander. My grandpa was in the tank brigade. My uncle was in the tank brigade. So for me, I always thought that I want to be a tank fighter. And jumping to not so long ago, eventually that's where I was put. But yeah, it's a very Zionist one, a very Zionist upbringing. And yeah, you just grow up knowing you'll go to the military at a very young age. Already the military is in your school. And then you never question that for a second. Also, historically, the narrative, you never question it. You never question any of the wars You never question the huge concrete strip that is 10 minutes from your house, which I later found out was the wall. And you never question anything. I mean, from in elementary school, we learned the sentence, it's good to die for your country. Some guy said it 100 years ago, and this is something we grew up with. We just know that it's mandatory. Everybody did it in the last 70 years. So if everybody gives 3 years of your life, then you too give 3 years of your life, and you just do it because you have to. And yeah, you just also know that you grow up, you go to school, and you know that whatever you choose to do in school will affect what you do in the army. So you also choose stuff that will be good for the army. And everything, including the school system, is very geared towards that. If you study computer science, then you do it in order to be in the intelligence forces of the army. And everything is just unquestioned. You don't question anything, just go straight ahead. And eventually, no, you'll join the army.
Yuval, I think it's so interesting hearing your story of just not questioning anything. That, you knew everybody was going to join the military and you didn't question the stories, and you definitely didn't question that it was good to die for your country, because I had much the same experience. So for people who are raised and based in America, I feel like there's a lot of that same mindset, that people have always served and that it is a good thing. And we honor them because people die for their country, and we don't ask a lot of questions. So even though currently we don't have the draft active, there's also many families where this is what everybody did. It was very much expected. Like you said, your dad was a tank driver and this is what you were going to do. And so I think having that be your experience growing up in Israel is fascinating, that it's a lot of the same experience here in America. At least it was in my background. I'm a third-generation Army veteran, and only one person was drafted. My dad was drafted for Vietnam, but everybody else, it was like they voluntarily chose this. So I think your story helps us find the similarities, because Israel seems very much over the top, but I think as Americans, how you had mentioned that it's so bound up in your identity as a citizen to support the military. So for you to find, how did you, because it's so much as part of your identity, how did you find your way questioning this? And how did you find the courage to choose this when you knew what your family would think?
So first of all, I would like to add another point, which I forgot to mention. And I think that's a very, very unique thing to Israeli society, is how militaristic it is, and how the military is important in the society and how just prevalent it is. Guns everywhere, and very big and scary guns. And you're very used to driving in a bus where there's an M16 barrel pointing at your head. So that's also a very major thing. But as far as when things started to change for me, I've always I've been rather an individualist child. So also in when I began high school, I started developing more and more my political identity. But it developed without any relation to Israel-Palestine. Started developing some anarchistic tendencies. And then at some point, I really don't remember how or through what, I encountered just pictures, images, and videos from the West Bank, not through major media channels, but just through independent photojournalists and collectives as such that do this. And I have all of a sudden realized that there is another reality, another completely different reality existing 20-minute drive from me. And it's not just a different reality, it's a reality that contradicts the one I've grown up with. I knew all these things. I knew that the IDF does only what it does, and only what it needs to do, and I knew it's the most moral army in the world. But then I see these pictures which very clearly prove that it does things that it really shouldn't do, and that surely are not moral. And it was also at a time, that's when I received my draft letter, and the army is considered an apolitical being in Israel. It's above politics. You don't touch it, even no matter how much political turmoil. You do not touch the military. That's because that is the base of Israel. Without it, there won't be Israel. So you don't touch the army, and soldiers are not allowed to speak about politics. Although, for me, it's very obvious to say now that the army in itself, every army, is inherently political. But I was one of the very, very lucky few who managed to get politicized by my draft letter. And once I got it, I realized that I shouldn't just go blindly. So these were these three elements, just my political, kind of starting to develop a political identity, starting to get more and more exposed to the Palestinian reality, and my draft process going on. It was these three things that kind of pushed the change, then moved the change in me. And as far as the military, I got to a pretty advanced stages in drafting. I wanted to enlist, but at a very early stage, I realized that I should be careful to where I enlist. So I had let's say, two very concrete directions, which I also got a lot into the tests of and got to pretty advanced stages again. Military paramedic. I thought that I'd be saving lives. And like a naval officer, because there are no Palestinians at sea, so I wouldn't have nothing to do with them. And honestly, I don't know what would have happened if I were accepted into these roles. Luckily, I didn't get accepted. And yeah, so I had this shift in me during my time, and then it got to a point where I said, okay, I want to go to the army, but it's just not specific roles. It's like whole things I don't want to do with. So I decided I will selectively refuse, which means I'll just go to the draft officer and tell him I'm not willing to be in the West Bank. I'm not willing to carry arms. I'm not willing to deal with the civilian population. Put me wherever you see fit. And then I kind of went along with this for a while. This was all during high school. And then I just realized that I'm not at all comfortable with the idea of enlisting. And I realized that I'm just making excuses for myself. And that I should just not go to the army, because it in itself is inherently problematic and inherently oppressive and holds this apartheid system and does not promise security, but rather is just a big policing force. And yeah, I realized that I'm in this political crossroads, which I'm either going to join the army and be a part of Israeli society and be complicit in all of this, or I'm gonna say no and just stand for what I thought was right and what I do still think was right. I didn't want to publicly refuse necessarily at the beginning. I just wanted, no, I just knew I didn't want to go to the army. So firstly, I reached out to, after I decided I'm not going, I've reached out to an organization called New Profile. And they deal with helping people lower their physical profile, which is the stat the army gives you that says like, what's your health situation? And they help you get out. So with them, I went through a process of something called a Conscientious Committee, which is a committee that exempts maybe like 10 people a year for conscientious reasons. And you appear before them and they exempt you only if you claim pacifism. And this pacifism needs to be apolitical because the army is not political. So if you say you have any empathy for Palestinians or you disagree with apartheid policy or disagree with the occupation, you won't get exempted. Just have to show that you're disgusted and appalled by any kind of violence. And it's to a point where they ask women especially, like, if you were raped, what would you do? Because you would not hit your rapist, obviously, because you're a pacifist. So that's the kind of discourse that's going on there. I went to them. We fought for 45 minutes. I didn't convince them I'm a pacifist, and I didn't get the exemption. And at that point, I'm a part of an organization called Mesavot, and we are basically the only organization in Israel right now dealing with military refusal and representing military refusers and supporting them. And at that point, after not getting exempted for those reasons, I reached out to Mesavot and decided I'm going to make a statement out of it, especially because of those times that it was just when it was declared that Ben Gvir, the ultra-fascist settler, is going to be in the government. So it kind of pushed me to, reach out to Mesavot and with them refuse publicly and loudly.
Wow, I have so many thoughts. I've just been doing this kind of deep dive into pacifism, actually, because that's Fellowship of Reconciliation's roots. And some of our most prominent pacifists, A.J. Muste, who was probably one of the most brilliant political minds in the U.S. Peace movement. And, and I was just like having this kind of debate internally on, I identify as a pacifist, but for me, a pacifist isn't about whether I get raped. I might hit back. That's an instinct. It's not the personal, but it is the political. It's this abhorrence to war, and it's this belief that the ends don't justify the means, and that how do we create a better world, and that we can't do that by using the tools of oppression. And so to hear that, and I'd heard that before about conscientious objection in Israel, but to hear that, but I wanted to ask, so I have family in Israel, and I recall very well when between my children's bar and bat mitzvahs, I brought them with me, and we spent 3.5 weeks traveling throughout the West Bank, staying with Palestinian families, and we did spend some time. We went to a family reunion, and what stunned me so much were two things. One, that my Israeli relatives had barely ever met a Palestinian, and had, there's just no knowledge of. And so when I would describe like these friendships I had with folks in the West Bank, they, it was this complete disbelief. And they said, no, you're wrong. You cannot have like nonviolent friends there. They must have machine guns hidden under the house. So I'm curious, like your interactions with Palestinians growing up, and knowledge about what was going on across, just half an hour away.
Yep.
And
Just to clarify,
that. Yes, please.
Just to clarify, I'm saying like part of the chat. I'm not a pacifist. Neither is Ms. Salvat. We do not claim this as an organization. But yeah, my like none basically. Until I seeked it actively, I knew of Palestinians. I didn't know any because in Israel there's also this concept of a good Arab, bad Arab. Because of course there are many Palestinians in 48 in sovereign Israel, but the Israeli consciousness does not consider them as Palestinians. For a lot of people, Palestinian is a Muslim from the West Bank or Gaza. People in Israel are Arabs, and they're not the same. It's not the same thing. So you also grow up thinking this. So in that sense, you've also never met a Palestinian, because also some of them do not describe themselves as Palestinians. But yeah, until I seeked it out actively, I have never met any Palestinians. And also, it was sometime into my activism because I was not an activist before I refused. And only during my refusal, I became an activist. And so it's not only until I became an activist, it's like until I started actively going to the West Bank and seeking these relations or East Jerusalem, I have not met and had a chance to talk with any Palestinians. And after meeting them, of course, you meet these. Of course, it's a whole different range of people, but the ones I met were very nice, very pleasant, accepting my Israeliness and not minding it because I'm there to help them and stand in solidarity with them. But I feel that this subject especially is very, very important to speak about, especially in relation to Gaza, because Gaza, until now, and also during the war, until the war and during the war, Gaza has been the biggest blind spot in Israeli society, because Israelis believe that the occupation in Gaza ended in 2005 after Israel pulled out of it, although it just became much more elaborate in many different ways, many other different ways. But yeah, there's this huge disconnection between us and the people there. But then you see activists from the left in Israel who have contacts there and who have friends there. And then you really see that human relations triumph borders and nationalities and all these dichotomies and things that we learn to accept as inherent and so natural, but are actually totally manufactured by states and leaders. And yeah.
I really think that one of the powerful ways that your story, right now, I think across the globe, it's not a question of pacifism. I think it's a question of conscience. And will we have the courage to have a conscience, to determine what we believe, and then stand against it, even if it's our own government, even if it's our friends or it's our family, even if it's for us. And I think that having your story and the other Israeli conscientious objector is leading the way, calling to account all of us of like, will we have a conscience? And then will we stand up to violence and say it's not okay? And I know that very few people and very few faiths have a history of this. It is there, but presently and culturally, we don't even question violence the way that we don't question the stories
Right.
we've been told. And so I really love that when you stand up publicly and share your story, I feel like it is bringing us all to account and also giving us a way to ask ourselves, are we going to stand up against this violence, even if it costs us? Because I think that as long as we don't confront that, we can stand on the sidelines, we can have opinions, we can read some more books. But right now, this question of refusing to accept the violence that we see in Gaza is polarizing people. And for some, we don't really understand why that's so hard to be against violence. So what would you say is most helpful when you're trying to ask people to refuse to accept what they're seeing happening in Gaza?
At least for me, what led me to questioning my manufactured reality was that I started becoming again anarchist. But without getting into that, the main thing in it for me was realizing that people just want to live, and that life is above everything. It's above states, it's above borders, it's above peoples. No, there are many, many Jews and Israelis that I'm way less connected and related to than many Palestinians. These are all constructs. And I think that it touches some very deep emotions because, again, people don't know each other. And one of the biggest things in this regard in Israeli society is how just crazy the dehumanization of Palestinian goes. I mean, yeah, I don't think that Israeli media really truly values or acknowledges Palestinian lives, which is something terrible to say, but that's the case that I feel. And I think for me, at least talking to my friends and all of that, the biggest and most important thing is that all these dead people are dead people. And no, even the worst terrorist was committed a suicide bombing and and killed civilians and did a terrible act. It must have come from somewhere. Without justifying what he did, just people experience pain, and all people experience pain, and our target should not be to keep a country safe. It should be to minimize pain and let people live rightfully. So for me, the biggest thing I try to do is just create these comparisons and say, well, they have families, they're people, they're sad. I mean, the fact that they killed 1,000 something people from us does not let us take their lives. I mean, because eventually we're just all humans and all of us feel pain. And nobody, I don't believe that anybody does what he does out of true evilness or whatever. So yeah, talking with people, I think that's one of my biggest point is just that, yeah, we are all just people, and war doesn't serve any of us. And if killing more than 30,000 Palestinians is what the state of Israel needs to survive, then we should question if it's right. We should question if the state of Israel, I mean, because human life is above all. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That human life is above all. I feel like that is really powerful for people to reckon with, because that's our future. If we don't choose that, there isn't really a future where we all get to stay alive.
Yeah. Could you tell us, just first, if you could give us a little background on, because very different than I think conscientious objection is done, or refusal to serve in the United States and other places, what that process looks like, the periods that you go to jail, when the releases are, how long conscientious objectors serve there on average, a little background on that, and then what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, so it starts all the way from your draft. And then it's like a 2-year process until you enlist. And a lot of conscientious objector friends knew from ever since they got the draft that they're not going to enlist. So they didn't push for any process with the military. I did want to enlist, so I did. But yeah, then your draft day comes, and you show up to the base where you get enlisted, and there is this process called the chain of becoming a soldier, and then there they give you your military ID and give you uniform and give you vaccines and all of that. And before going in, before becoming a soldier, that's where you refuse. And then you start this process of them trying to convince you and telling them, okay, let's give you another job or something. First time I refused, they offered me to become a stable boy for the police, cleaning horse manure instead of holding a gun. Of course, I refused that kind of offer as well. And yeah, they try to negotiate with you, and you, of course, know that you're not joining the army, so it's not a very, nothing happens there. And then they send you to the jail in the base. You spend from a few hours to 2 days there, and until you get sentenced. And you get sentenced for refusal of an order, which is not a very severe crime. So you can get either between 7 to 45 days in prison for that. And then you get sentenced and you get sent to prison. And how it works essentially is after every time you finish this short sentence, you get another draft letter. You get released, and then when you get released, still in prison, they give you a letter and they say you need to enlist in 24 hours. So it goes just again and again and again and again until somebody breaks. There has yet to been a refuser who joined the army during his refusal process. So for me, it was like 10 days in the beginning, and then I just got a few more sentences until it totaled up to 70 days, and I was eventually released. Now, we in Mesavot represent 4 military refusers. The one that has refused first, his name is Tal. He, to this point, has been sentenced to, I believe, I'm not sure if 150 or 170 days. And the first time he was sentenced was, his first sentencing was to 30 days. Mine was to 10. So it's now, when there is a war, they're much, much harsher with it. And we also have yet to have a refuser who has been exempted during this war. So we wait and see how it goes.
Could you tell us about Tal? He signed a letter along with 100, it said 100 other young Israelis who said they were refusing to serve. Can you tell us a little bit about that letter?
I'm not sure which letter you're referring to.
Well,
There has been a few.
I think it was like 100 college. I mean, they were 18 because, like you said, you get drafted out of high school, but I think Tal and then Sophia all signed it with 100, and they said that they were refusing to join the military until there's a democracy in Israel for both sets of people.
It was during the anti-government protests.
Yeah, so this letter was before the war. It was during the anti-government protests. And is there maybe a way to mute the... Okay. No, no. Yeah, I just muted the comments. It's distracting. So it was during the anti-government protests, and it has not been 100. It was actually 250, I think.
Wow.
Which was the biggest refusal letter signed, I think, since 2005 or something. Yeah, but again, it was before the war, and Tal decided he's going to refuse before the war, and also Sophia. So they're both signed on it.
Yeah. Do you think that there is like, so people were protesting before, but with the war, do you feel like that is allowing more young Israelis like yourself to question their political identity or to question the military?
That's a tough question with a sad answer. People always have mixed emotions about stuff like this. It happened during every war, most prominent during the first Lebanon war, where there was the biggest anti-war movement, because it's kind of like our Vietnam. But refusing is the active act of not going to the military for political reasons. And we have not seen a major increase in that. There are many people who did not join the war, and the military prison right now, it's at the highest capacity it has been in the last years, for sure. But it's hard to say for how many of the people there the political cause is a major one. I can only say that we in Mesavot currently represent 4 refusers, which are people who have not joined the war because they resisted on political grounds, and that's the main reason for not joining the war. And they also want to make a statement out of it. I know that there are many, many more who have found other ways to leave the military, also because they don't believe it's unjust, because they believe the war is unjust. But yeah, so the most solid statistics we have is just people who have been with us in Mesavot, and we have not seen a major increase of people joining us, I think. We peaked during the counter-government demonstrations before the war.
So not Palestine related, but internal politics related is when it was more popular there.
Yeah, it's sad, but yeah, because also it's much easier going against your government while staying inside the Israeli discourse, but resisting the military in support of Palestinians is kind of leaving this, and that's a harder thing to do. So yeah, yeah, there hasn't been very major increase in people that are with us. That's what we can say for sure.
It's a hard thing to go against one's culture, and I know this myself as an American Jew, and when I really took on working on the issue of Palestine and being maligned in my synagogue and getting death threats and being deported when I was deported from Israel, being cut out of part of my family, and much, much more. But I imagine that kind of backlash that I've faced, which felt and still feels very, very severe and significant for me in the US, I can't imagine that it compares to what Israelis who do this political work experience, and I wonder what that's like. And including, like, is it well known who you are, or is it more under the radar? Whereas a lot of the backlash I got was because I'm very public about it.
The biggest thing is the alienation you feel, because all of your friends are in the army. It's what everybody in your community has done, and everything is around it. So the main thing is, I'd say, the alienation. We have received personal attacks, but not anything like too major. But for example, yeah, Tal I'm speaking to him as a friend, and he said that already when he goes every time he goes to the military base to refuse, people there recognize him. But yeah, it's a very, very unpopular opinion. People don't let us in to, I mean, we just can't get into schools no matter how we try. Just to voice this side as well. I mean, mainly our Instagram comments are like traitors and all of this, of course. But for me, again, I also refused at a time when it was much, much easier to refuse, because the government wasn't favorable on many, many people. So my act of refusal got sympathy also from the center left, the Zionist center left. So it's hard for me to speak about refusal now, but then it was much easier for sure. But for me, the main experience is just the alienation, being an anti-militarist person inside maybe the most militaristic society.
Diana, or I'm happy to go otherwise. All right, I'm going to jump in, and I got really excited when I heard you say that there are 4 people. So I'm wondering if I'm aware of Tal and Sophia and Ben, if somebody else has done so, and if you could tell us a bit about them and best ways, because I've been trying to follow myself, and I really want to keep up with any news about the current conscientious objectors, or I believe you call yourselves refuseniks as well. And when somebody's out for a bit, or just any updates, and what are the best ways to follow along on social media, and what to sign up to get updates from, what organizations to sign up to get updates from in English for us.
So I can't really elaborate on the 4th because he's anonymous, and also I don't know him personally. Yeah, every other person that refuses, it's exciting. And as far as following us, maybe you should send the link. We have a link tree. Just look up Mesarvot, how it's MESARVOT. You can sign up to our newsletter there. You can donate to us, and you can follow us on we have Instagram, we have Facebook, we have Twitter, and that's the best place to get updates. Yeah. You're muted.
Is Miss Our Vote the same as Israeli Solidarity Network? Is that the English?
Is that as Refuser Solidarity Network?
Yes, sorry, Refuser Solidarity Network, or are they distinct?
No, they are different organizations. We are part of the same broader umbrella, and we work closely. But it's not the same organization. No. You're also welcome to sign up to their newsletter, but they're touching on wider subjects.
Oh, Diane, you want to jump in? And folks, I put one of the links. I believe this one is to their Instagram, and I see somebody else put the Linktree event in the chat. So please take note.
Yuval, thank you for sharing with us, because
Sure.
you mentioned it multiple times about how part of your story was you knew you didn't really want to be in the army, but you would just kind of figure out a way to do it, and then you came to this point where you knew that you wanted to refuse, and then to refuse publicly. And I feel like that is the part that Martin Luther King, when we were doing civil rights, he caught the conscience of the nation. Like, he knew that he had to publicly show what was wrong so that the country would notice and their consciences would be pricked. And so I feel like as you keep continuing doing this, you are being the person that is showing us that if you can have a conscience and you can go against your country and even your culture of what you were taught, then the rest of us can also choose to have a conscience and to choose to object. I think that is the big two things that I think conscientious objector is like hard for me to even pronounce. I've been stumbling on it all week, but having a conscience and choosing to object when you know that human life is not being honored, it is not being made the main thing. I think that's one of the greatest powerful things and the courage that you give us by doing it publicly, refusing.
Thank you.
So thank you for that. We're going to continue to highlight your voice because I think it is contagious when people start to have a conscience, and hopefully more and more people will join you, and it will be less and less lonely for you as you lead us.
Yeah, so I want to
listening.
Just begin a little bit, actually, before we move into some questions from our audience and a couple of folks that we want to invite to come on camera to ask them. But first, I wanted to ask your reflections on this current moment. And, I spend all my day from beginning to end, trying to follow news in the ways that I can, trying to follow Israeli media some, because I always like to know what the narrative is there, and then Al Jazeera and so on. But I know that it's always different from within. And but one thing I heard I think yesterday or so was that some suggestion that there's an expectation of this war going on for months or years. And if you could give your thoughts on this moment, where it's going, and I know that's a very, very broad question, but
if there's one thing I've learned through these 2-3 years of being an activist, is not to expect anything. Again, we were peaking before the 7th, and then the 7th happened, and things change all the time, very, very frequently. Right now, the direction that I feel we are going in is just Israel being shunned from the West, through boycotts, hopefully eventually through sanctions as well. And more and more recognition of a Palestinian state. It's really hard to say. I mean, because I feel that also when at one moment the Israeli government can decide that no, it's too big of a risk at this point, and then it'll, I don't know, stop the war. And yeah, it's really hard for me to say, but the international direction for me at least is a hopeful one. Yeah, I'm looking at Europe, I'm looking at the US, and seeing the popular uprising of people also refusing to be complicit. It's also a form of refusal. It's very, first of all, inspiring, and also seems to start pushing things in a what I feel is a good direction.
So I want to ask a question from Alexei Tsuni. Hopefully I pronounced that okay. From the European Bureau of Conscientious Objectors, and then afterwards I want to invite my friend Yuri. Yuri, I'm not going to try to pronounce your last name because it will be a shame, to come on camera. Yuri's in Ukraine and is a pacifist and conscientious objector there. But Alexia is asking about if there's any, I know there's a bit on the far left, like +972, but if there's any Israeli media that reports on the conscientious objector, if it reaches any type of mainstream media.
Actually, we are much more popular on right-wing Israeli channels than we are in any central one. Yeah, of course, not favorable reportings. But yeah, I mean, we have very close relations with 972 and their Israeli branch, Sicha Mekomit, local conversation. But yeah, I mean, especially, I think in the last year we've had a lot of like Israeli media as well. Especially, I don't know, like live discussions and panels and stuff like that. We also had a primetime item like more than a year ago, but nothing that, of course, not you know, only challenging us and never truly listening, I'd say, and also, yeah, nothing that like really follows just what's your stance on this. And we've had an instance a few months back, Tal and Sophia. No, I'm not sure if it's Tal and Sophia. Tal and Sophia, I think, were broadcasted live in some afternoon news broadcast. And they've asked them something like about the war, like, why did you refuse the war, or something like that. And they said, well, because of the occupation. They said we wanted to refuse even before the war broke out, because there was an occupation. And they just cut them off and said, oh, okay, thank you, we didn't come here to hear this. Then just like shut it off. So I think that's the spirit of mainstream things. Yeah. You're muted again.
So I'm going to invite Yuri on to unmute and please to ask your question. Welcome, Yuri. Nice to see you. And we will need you to unmute, Yuri. Please unmute. Ask to unmute. You might not be able to join at this point. We will.
Hello.
Hello,
Greetings.
Yuri.
Greetings from Kiev. So wonderful to hear you, Yuval, and
Thank you.
solidarity and support from Kiev. here in
Thank you.
Ukraine, we understand in part what people feel in Gaza during this genocidal war, because unfortunately bombs are too harassing us here. And you know, you told you're not a pacifist, and I respect, of course, your views. But you know, I think that pacifism is important part of diversity of social and democratic society, and pacifism gives people a hope for better world without wars. I personally came to Israeli embassy here in Kiev to deliver a message that Israel should comply with order of International Court of Justice, and also Israel must comply with recommendations of Human Rights Committee of United Nations regarding Israel should stop imprisoning conscientious objectors. And this is common problem in Israel and in Ukraine, because in Ukraine too, the conscientious objectors are being imprisoned now. So I would like to ask you, how do you think we could transform our societies and our legal systems to make our states, our governments more compliant with human rights standards? Maybe we need to educate people more on nonviolent resistance, because of course pacifism is nonviolent resistance to all sorts of war and aggression. And I think even people who are not pacifist understand that not only some force methods, but love and truth is a greater force. Ukrainian philosopher Grigory Skovoroda once wrote a dialogue in which one of a person said, I am not a soldier, I am a lawyer. My profession is to know civil laws. So maybe we need to help judges to understand better that and judges, lawyers, prosecutors, all of them understand better that there could be nonviolent methods to protect rights of people, to achieve self-defense, to achieve justice without violence, as Martin Luther King said. How do you think how we could transform our societies? Thank you.
I can speak, of course, about my society, about the Israeli one. And because we have a lot of dogmas that are very common, and for us, we of course always talk about the Palestinian side, but also a very important talking point for us is the relation of the army to our society. Because a very, very common concept in Israel is the concept of security. And we claim, for example, that the army does not bring security, because the sad reality is that a lot of people, when they really feel victims, don't have a place in their heart for Palestinians. So we try to reach out and say, hey, this is harming you as well. And since the beginning of this war, for example, we talked about the point that the army has killed more Israeli hostages in Gaza than it managed to rescue. And that, of course, violence only breeds more violence, because all of these kids that have been displaced and massacred, and like, what will they grow up to be? So for us, it's really talking like there was this research that was published by some institute not long after the war started, and it showed that the worst tactic for talking to Israelis about the war is trying to sympathize with Palestinians. This is sympathizing with Palestinians is the thing that like brought up most like disagreements and anger, because people really are in their own pain. So yeah, for us it's just trying to speak to the Israeli heart of like, this does not help you. You know, we are now, and I support this, but Israel now is at risk of again being shut off from the Western world. More soldiers keep on dying. We push and push any peace with Palestinians away because, I mean, it's not trivial that somebody would want to do peace with the state that committed genocide to them. So yeah, just sometimes it's being pragmatic and speaking to the heart of your own people, and like just saying like, yeah, this does not help you. That's at least one of our tactics.
And we're going to bring Alexia on from European Conscientious Objector Bureau, if I had that correct. But first, yeah, you got me so much thinking on that. And if you could talk a little bit about before and during and now, kind of the dehumanization of Palestinians. I know you said that there's this idea of separating Palestinian citizens of Israel and, you know, referring to them as Arabs or the good Arab or the bad Arab, but West Bank and Gaza. And have there been times, I guess, when there was more humanization, when Palestinians were less dehumanized? And are there any strategies for, because we were talking just about like this moment of ending this war, but any like long-term strategies for helping Jewish Israelis to recognize the humanity of Palestinians, or as I would say, the humanity of all people, but in this case specifically. And then Alexia, I'm going to bring you on.
I think that this dehumanization thing is a very much planned project by the Israeli state ever since it was founded. So I believe it goes way back. But dealing with it, it's just, for me, it's like trying to bring my friends to the West Bank. There are many initiatives that fly Israelis and Palestinians together for like a week in some European country, or many programs that just try to make Israelis and Palestinians meet and talk. A lot of times these projects just fail to acknowledge power imbalances, and treat Palestinians and Israelis in that space as equals, which is obviously not the case. So a lot of times it doesn't work, but yeah, on my part, it's just trying to drag friends and come meet this guy and come meet this guy. And yeah, just really on that level. And also, for example, in like our demonstrations, like the left demonstrations in Jerusalem, for example, what we have been doing now for months is just holding pictures of people killed by Israeli bombs in Gaza with their names and their age, and just, yeah, trying to let the faces speak for themselves. So also a big part of like the radical left activism is this trying to humanize the people on the other side, and yeah, just hoping it'll act as some wake-up call for Israel. Yeah.
Thank you. We have a question from Janine. She's speaking of a near total blackout of media coverage of the Palestinian narrative on this. And if you could give us an idea of the propaganda campaigns taking place, or Hasbara, as Israel calls it, there, and how that affects mindset, and including, I want to just add into that what we've just seen in the last, just right recently with the banning of Al Jazeera, and then even initially going after Associated Press for their camera that was facing into Israel. So yeah, if you could talk a bit about that. We feel like in the US we have media blackouts, and I know it's and propaganda, and I know it's doesn't hold a candle.
So I think that much more than active, it's passive propaganda, which just means not showing pictures and images from Gaza. There have been some horrible pictures, which I definitely regret seeing. But to reach them, you need to dig deep into independent Palestinian media. But also, we've seen it a lot for sure, there have been sexual assaults committed by Hamas on the 7th. I don't doubt this at all. But Israel really, really weaponized this. And said a lot of things which were later found out as wrong, and also the beheaded babies. Hamas did stuff that was bad enough. It didn't need to behead babies to do some bad stuff. But yeah, this was eventually discovered to be just a false claim that was spread on purpose by the Israeli state. So it's also these like individual facts, and also just the keeping people blind, be it through what is happening now, or be it like what led to this situation. People don't realize there was a siege on Gaza. People don't know that more than 80% of the population there were poor, that there was no drinking water, that people went through operations without anesthesia. It has been a terrible place, and if you know it, then you can understand why people in such a bad situation would do such an extreme act. But this was totally hidden away from the Israeli eye. So I'd say that Israeli propaganda is much more a passive one than an active one. It's much more just looking the other way, and also this kind of like doublespeak stuff of just, yeah, like what a terrorist means in Hebrew. A terrorist is a Palestinian who has been killed by the army. It's not somebody who attacked civilian population. In our talks, soldiers can be murdered. A soldier cannot be murdered because he is a soldier. So it's all kind of this stuff. Or I don't know, that the IDF is the most moral army in the world. Why? Never have I ever once heard an explanation. So yeah, it's just passive, like looking the other way and hiding stuff, and also just how our language and culture is structured around it. And changing of historical narratives also, obviously.
Yeah, Diana, if you could speak to this a little bit, because this is also, your story in that way.
I'm just really honored to hear your story, Yuval, and the similarity is that people are so the same across all time, how we're just taught to dehumanize somebody else, but very passively, because actively might make us feel bad about our own stuff. And so I, as a conscientious objector, I didn't even know what that was until I was in middle of the preemptive strike in the Iraq War. But I think the same thing, what was very true is that as an American, I was just taught that there were two buckets of people. There were the good guys, which was us, and then there was everybody else. And so if we were the good guys in every war and in every conflict and just like
Yeah.
existing, then I was taught not to notice the person at the other end of my gun or my policies, and I just didn't notice them. I didn't have to question whether they were bad guys or not, or what did they do, or anything. It was just, well, if I'm the good guy, which I was told I was, and that feels good to me, then everybody else is just the bad guy. And when
Yeah.
that changed, when I really saw the person at the other end of my weapon in the middle of the Iraq War, I was like, oh my gosh, we are both just really scared and we both really want to stay alive. And I'm pretty sure that our governments really don't care that much about either one of us. You know, like we were
Yeah.
thrown in these places and told to see each other as the problem. And I feel like that was the transformative thing for me, was when I refused to see myself as the only person who had goodness, who had value, who had worth. And when I chose to humanize, that meant that nobody was collateral damage. Like
Yeah.
I could
Right.
take what I wanted and people just had to suffer for it. And I think that that is the thread that I hope we're going to we're going to ask people to look at that, because I was in Iraq in 2003 in the invasion, big bombing, and after I came home from war, after over a year, the next time I had ever had an M16 shoved in my face, like I had in war, was when I was in the West Bank, going through a checkpoint. And I was on this, touristy bus, and all of a sudden, this sweet young 18-year-old is walking on the bus and shoves an M16 in my face. And as a combat soldier, I was like, ooh, like everything told me that this was a war zone and they were waging war there. Even though my Christian narrative had told me that Israel was this mythical, beautiful place where it was God's country and everything good was there. That just disintegrated, and I knew that this, once you see it, you can't unsee it, and everything there you knew was wrong in your soul. So I feel like just continuing to refuse to dehumanize each other is how we reclaim our agency. And I remember Ariel was on my podcast and she had said this line that stuck for me. She was like, we just want our right not to kill. Which in America, we talk a lot about our right to kill, not a right not to kill. And I was like, yes, I think we need to start choosing that or fighting for that we're not going to dehumanize each other. We're going to choose each other. And I know there's many, many conscientious objectors on this call, and I'm grateful for you. And there's a lot of conscientious objectors from veterans from Vietnam, because there's a draft. I'm from the Iraq War. There's not a draft. So a lot of the elderly vets for peace are like, where's your generation, Diana? I was like, well, it wasn't so bad for us. In fact, for many people, it was financially good for them, and it gave them some valor in society. And, that's seen as something that they're always honored for. So I'm just grateful that we can bring conscientious objection to the conflict in Gaza and to our humanity, because that's what I hope my sons have. That's what I hope that they get to see us creating. And I know we are over the hour mark, so we are definitely going to wrap this up. But thank you so much to everybody who is here. Yuval, thank you for
Thank you for having me.
publicly being a refuser and sharing your story with us.
Thanks.
I'm gonna invite Alexia on real quick first, and then we'll bring Susan Smith on for a moment just to thank everybody who has supported this this event. Alexia, please. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Fellowship of Reconciliation and the Latter Christians for organizing all this interesting event. And I'm also grateful to you, Yuval, and to Messervot. I was with you both in November and in February, and I joined you in your actions, and I'm really, really inspired about what you are doing there with this great personal cost. And this is at the point where I wanted to ask and to focus of the solidarity and the international solidarity, especially if you are aware of what is happening all over the world, especially for the refugees, for the conscientious objectors. And you said already, and we shared also in the chat, funding is very important, raising awareness is important. Please just tell us more ways that we could support you, because you are really now the focus of our efforts during this time, as well as, of course, we never forget the war in Ukraine and our Russian, Ukrainians, and Belarusian objectors. But okay, genocide is only happening in Gaza, so you are also being considered the traitors in your own country. So we understand your very difficult situation. So please tell us more ways that we could support you. And many, many thanks again for and the Red Letter Christians for this.
Again, you're more than welcome to donate to us. But yeah, amplify our voice. I think it's very valuable that people know that there are not only Jews, but Israelis who refuse this, who disagree with this, who feel that it does not represent them, who want to see another future. And then we totally feel international support, and we are very grateful for it. But yeah, I think that amplifying voices, also obviously of Palestinians, is always a very good way to help.
Thank you. So I'm going to bring on my dear friend and colleague, Susan Smith, we got a lot of support for this event and want to give some thanks.
Hi, everyone. We want to thank our many co-sponsors from all over the world for this event. First of all, Rabbis for Ceasefire and Africa for Palestine. Also, we have Ban Killer Drones and the Churches for Middle East Peace, Code Pink, Community Peacemaker Teams, and Muriel is on the call today. Connection EV from Europe, Conscientious Canada, Conscientious Objection Watch Turkey, European Bureau of Conscientious Objectors, and we just heard from Alexia. We have International Fellowship of Reconciliation, Christian Renew with us, and of course I4 is FOR USA's umbrella organization. Let's see, we have Pax Christi, Freedom Road, Hindus for Ceasefire, Faith Strategies LLC, Jewish Voice for Peace, Middle East Crisis Response. We have both Mennonite Action, and Adam is with us from Mennonite Action, and Mennonite Central Committee. And we have Phil. I saw Phil is with us today, and Candace. Pax Christi, New Jersey. Abigail is here, and actually she's Pax Christi UN, and Kathy O'Leary is with us. Of course, Red Letter Christians, Diana, our co-host, and Shane Claiborne, who actually was zooming in when he could from the West Bank. Veterans for Peace, the Ukrainian pacifist movement. Thank you so much, Yuri, for joining us from Kiev. We have Olga Kartach from Our House, which is, she's from Belarus and in exile in Lithuania. And we're so thrilled that you could join us today, Olga. World Beyond War, David Hartzog joined us today. Rockland for Palestine, Jewish Voice for Peace, Northern New Jersey, Jewish Voice for Peace, Westchester, and I'm sure I'm missing anyone, but some folks, but that is the bulk of the list.
Thank you so much, and especially thank you to Yuval for
Sure.
joining
Thank you for
us.
having me.
I put again the link in the chat, but I don't actually see a donate button on the link tree.
There is a big
Let me
it's a big like
the circle at the
slide
top
picture.
is it's on the picture. Support us. Okay, so
Yeah,
I'm going to put that exact link in the chat.
PayPal.
And then we are also going to send out, we're going to send out the video to everybody, and we're going to send that link again, encouraging folks to donate, and how to follow Red Letter Christians and Waging Peace, which is Diana's podcast and book and story, and Fellowship of Reconciliation, and much more. And Yuval, we thank you for your work, and
Sure. Thank you.
and